Okay.
So this is a situation.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
I'm Celestial Tabris. I am not directly involved, but I got numerous messages over the year from people concerned about Draikinator. Solo here is a little more closer to the situation. Solo.
Yes, I'm Solo, also known as Solo Ratiste. For a very long time, I was a mod on Nate's Animator Hub server. I maintained the bots, but I was in fact a mod, and I have been involved in some of their map projects, and they've also been involved in my StarClan's voice project.
So to to start off, and before we get into anything deep, we're just gonna lay out everything that happened right now. Draikinator was antagonistic, somewhat impulsive, and considered a bully to a lot of children for a long time. Um, and for that period of time, it was just kind of poor and just kind of irrehensible behavior. It wasn't call out worthy. It was just kind of like be better to kids. But lately, it's led to them making a serious federal crime, a huge mistake in how they confronted a child, and now the matter is being dealt with privately by the child's parents and officials. Draikinator was not predatory or approaching this person with inappropriate intent, and any accusation saying otherwise is false. But they did make it clear in that instance that they are not safe around minors in their current state of mind. And it ended up becoming humbly and harshly requested by the community at large that they leave the community. Um, if you are a minor, you need to exit this video.
Yes.
We aren't going to be showing any explicit imagery. We're going to be talking about some very adult topics. And everything that I just said is everything that you need to know about the situation. Even if you're sitting here considering to ignore me and just keep watching the video, I am serious. Please leave. As for everyone else, including people who are either considering making their own videos or are angry and confused and you are over the age of 18, by all means, sit through.
Yes. And
Okay.
as for my role, I'm going to be clarifying and giving some context, considering that I was, involved in this way with Nate for so long.
So, all right. Well, let's explain what happened in more explicit detail.
Well,
So,
yeah.
you want to say?
Well, as a large of a whole, again, not safe for work topic. Basically, it came out that an artist had in fact been drawing some not child safe stuff, and in the past, some of it had involved warriors, but a whole mess happened when it began to circulate in public and minors were getting their hands on it. And one of the people largely involved with shunning said artist was, in fact, Nate, who had cited that their concern for children was really the key factor to how they were handling this situation. But a lot of people agreed they were way too aggressive about this. And also,
Mhm.
that aggression sort of is what led to them in the issues they are now.
Yes. What ultimately ended up happening is minors were getting a hold of this material that was very much, set away. It was not accessible, but everyone was going to seek it out.
Mm.
Nate also had access to it. In the heat of the moment, everyone was tense and angry, and it reached a point where a child who liked Nate's art but did not like Nate themselves made the comment on their Twitter. Nate had a tendency to um, reverse search their name and look to see if anyone was talking about them. They saw what this kid had said, and they went into their DMs to ask why they had said this. They had a very short back and forth, and the child chose not to engage any further, so they stopped responding. And Nate, in that silence, decided to send this child the explicit material in question to this child. So Nate sent porn to this child in anger,
Mm-hmm.
point blank. The child continued not to engage and just, they posted on their Twitter in a panic and told their parents. And Nate freaked out because they had no idea this was a child.
Yes.
So,
Yes,
um,
Nate had mistakenly, in their own apology, they referred to this as having mistakenly read the graduation year as being their age, aka
mhm.
22. Hence why they thought that, that this, yeah, hence why they in the moment did that. But in hindsight, again, that is also not the greatest response, of course.
Yeah, you should not send unsolicited porn to people, period. And everyone agreed that
Yes,
that was an inappropriate response.
and that's
Um,
where the, but where most of the heat came from. The anger over them having done that.
so that's pretty much the whole situation. Like I said earlier, um, the child's parents are involved. There is a potential investigation happening, and we are to assume that Nate has removed themselves from Twitter, removed themselves from fandom spaces, and removed themselves from children after the request of the community.
Least at least when it concerns like active social media where there can be direct contact with them. Uh,
Yes.
I highly doubt there's going to be any removal from YouTube, as Nate has expressed that is their source of income, that's their job. So I highly doubt there will be any removal from there, but perhaps there will be again the removal of fandom content from there.
And that's where we have to get into, you know, the big question because Nate has acquired a fan base. Nate
Mm.
is very well loved by children and adults alike, and I think they've they've worked hard. They've made a really warm community around themselves. But like I mentioned prior, they had a tendency to be impulsive and hostile towards children. Um, I I feel like this was evident in the beginning of their career in the Warrior Cats fandom, where children would like certain characters and they would not uh, respond well.
No.
They would often tell children to kill themselves.
Uh,
Sometimes there were homophobic or transphobic children, and instead of disengaging from the situation, Nate felt that they should engage and spoke to most children with aggression. It was very unnerving because, as much as I agree that having to see that amount of homophobia and transphobia every day is very stressful and very draining, as the adult, you have to choose to disengage or educate. You can't do that. They started to slowly but surely stop that behavior, but it was only after, numerous occasions of saying, hey, that's not appropriate. Hey, that's not appropriate. They've spent the they spent most of the year being the center of drama, and most of the drama has centered around how they treat others and how they treat children.
and during specifically a lot of that time, I believe that was around the time I also was the mod on that server, so of course I got to also see a lot of how they refer to it in private. um Nate would often of course express regret at having been aggressive in the past, but at the same time often they also saw it as semi justified in some cases of them being responding just to trolls who often would say these homophobic and transphobic things just to piss them off. And in their case, they said that yes, I responded aggressively to that because I shouldn't have to deal with this. So to an extent, they did acknowledge that they were in fact aggressive, but to another extent, they also sometimes seem to justify it. But most specifically, the things in the past, they seem to definitely regret.
Yes. Um, as someone who was on the outside, I would see that they would react, they would face the consequences of that reaction, and then they would apologize. This was a cycle for a year. Um, and it was unfortunate to see happen because I do feel like there were a lot of situations where, their headstrong behavior helped people. And I think a lot of people saw that. But there were so many occasions, and like I mentioned prior, kids would come into my messages upset and stressed because they feel like they were treated unfairly by this person that they admired. And it was hard for me to keep it was hard for me to want to get close to this person and support this person when I knew kids were getting hurt, even if they weren't being, um,
Yeah,
they weren't, even though Nate wasn't a predator or
no,
they
no,
weren't
definitely.
being abused necessarily. They were getting hurt, and it was hard for me to be okay with that.
Yes, and to back up your statement to prove that anyone who watches this video that you're not lying, I can confirm at least one instance that there was definitely a kid that we could have treated significantly better.
Solo, you're cutting.
Oh, sorry. Uh,
It's okay.
there was definitely one instance specifically that I recall that I have been confirmed was one of the kids that, you know, contacted you, who I've also since apologized to for my behavior or lack of, you know, stepping in and stopping that. Uh,
Hmm.
and so I can confirm that there were indeed cases where Nate did not seem to act appropriately towards these children, even telling some of them to like change their behaviors, change their attitudes, which, you know, of course, is highly unprofessional to do when you treated a child as badly as you did in that situation, in which case it was almost treating them like sort of a criminal because they shipped a ship pairing that is, you know, canon and isn't that bad, I suppose. You know, Fern Song and Ivy Pool. Uh,
Yes.
Essentially, we sort of acted as if this was basically a criminal because they shipped this, which, of course, at the time, I'm guilty for not having seen how that was a problem, but in hindsight, having a new perspective, I of course realized I was not in the right. I messed up in not stopping what I was doing and basically being part of interrogating this kid for the mods. In which case, I have now since apologized to the kid, and they've, you know, yeah.
they 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 seem to appreciate being heard.
Mm,
What ended up happening also, not but a couple of months ago, a month or two ago, I felt like I needed to say something. So
yes.
I made a post addressed to Nate saying, "You are hurting these children who admire you. You have to change your behavior because they are scared, hurt, and they don't feel safe around you. And it's a problem. It's a problem on a whole community scale because you are a important and popular and well-intended person. So you have to be a better role model."
Yeah.
This happened 2 months ago, and in that time,
Mm-hmm.
Nate promised the community in public that they would take the initiative to change behavior
Mm.
and do better about how they choose to react to situations. And that's why when this particular situation came up, um, it set everyone off because it felt like we were just doing this again. Like we just had this conversation and now we're doing it again. You
Yes.
know?
Yeah. And I also did inform that in private, this was the case wasn't the most fairly represented, as it kind of initially was just sort of brushed off by, I mean, all of us as a whole as just being another instance of, oh, pointless Nate hate, because we'd sort of, I don't know, in a sense it sort of felt like that was all call out posts were, because they were so many that essentially we could just say, yeah, this, there is no substance to it, and we, at least I didn't give it a fair chance at the time. But in hindsight, I of course realized that you did make some good points, and that, you know, I regret having sort of semi lashed out at you for it.
Thank you. I mean, and at the time it was okay. I realized when I made the post, I was coming for someone who has protected, helped, and
Mm.
really got a lot of children in uncomfortable situations out of those situations.
Yes,
But
it's it
it
is
was
a
hard because I felt like they weren't they weren't balancing it. I felt like they were doing too much hurting or too much, like they were taking a chance with their behavior every time. Like
yeah.
if I just behave this way, I'm
Mm,
either going to get the worst possible situation out of it or I'm going to get the best possible one. And that's
definitely.
just not how you deal with anything. You have to think about what you do before you do it. And that's all I wanted to get out at the time.
Yeah. And we as not just me but the entire mod team, we did sort of misrepresent the arguments given to us and sort of just tried to twist them into these pointless accusations, when in reality, when you get a different perspective from it, they were legitimate to, you know, a lot of points. But I think essentially where I was coming from was more I was afraid of the fallout. I was afraid of others taking this opportunity to try and use it to being pointless haters. But, I shouldn't have let that blind my view on the points you were making.
Hmm. But I mean, unfortunately, you were correct, and we are also correct in this situation where we are now in a situation where people are taking a very sensitive and serious situation and
Yes.
making it either into a revenge
Yeah.
a revenge push or completely sending out misinformation.
Yeah.
So
And going
we're,
from
we're
that,
gonna get this clear. Oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
going from that, there was, of course, another question being raised recently: is Draikinator a pedophile? To which, no, they are
No,
not.
they are not a pedophile.
Uh,
Um,
the reason this sort of misinformation, I believe, might be being spread is both because of these hostile individuals who are like being petty about the fact that they were called out by Nate or their friends were called out by Nate, so they're trying to shift the blame, or
mhm.
it's a horrible version of the whisper game where essentially these people are hearing more and more uh abridged versions of the story, and eventually what goes from Nate impulsively sent unsolicited pictures of a non-safe for work gallery to someone out of and a dumb impulsive fit of rage, to being them a pedophile. So just point blank, no, they're not.
um, Unfortunately, there are people who think that they deserve this because they have they have falsely accused people of crimes and behavior before, and it has gone off the deep end.
Mm,
Unfortunately, that's not how things work. You have to say what's true. I don't care how much you think they deserve it. Do not tell people Draikinator is a pedophile because you are not only hurting Nate, you are hurting the case of the child involved. You are
and you're
hurting
hurting the
the
minor.
parents. Yeah. You're hurting the minor specifically. You're hurting the parents, and you're making things hard for what is potentially the police who are going to investigate the situation.
Yes, because
Nate,
you're going to be delegitimizing it to an extent, and that's very, very dangerous to do with something as serious as this.
yes, Nate cannot get convicted for pedophilia because they are not a pedophile. They will get, if they get convicted, they will be getting convicted for something else.
Mm,
But do not delegitimize the situation, or else it's going to make things harder for everyone.
yes.
Please.
Mm. And again, from that uncomfortable topic to another, you also wrote the question: did Drakeinator defend someone who drew child porn? And to that, I actually did get the full story of that one from Nate themselves a while ago, because I was being confronted about it by someone due to something that happened regarding a map and me
Mhm.
kicking someone out, but that was a completely other ordeal. What Nate basically explained to me was that this is, of course, the Angel Hawk situation, or pumpkin claws. That it was discovered that they had drawn some rather, of course, yes, non safe for work, but also some questionable things that especially led into, the allegations of child porn and transphobia and such.
Mhm.
But what I was explained by Draikinator and their choice to defend Angel Hawk in this situation was Angel Hawk at the time was 19 and completely alone in college. They basically had no money to survive and felt that porn commissions was the absolute only way they could earn any money to survive. And so, out of desperation, they drew these questionable things, which they have since regretted. Nate expressed that they felt sympathy for Angel Hawk or Pumpkin Claws because they could understand that in this situation it wasn't something that Pumpkin Claws was happy about, it wasn't something they were proud about, it was something done out of desperation. And at one point, essentially, also, they kind of saw it as essentially no different than being forced into doing sex work.
Mhm.
So that's why that's the context of Nate's side of that situation.
Um, you can argue that no matter what, in desperation, you should not draw XYZ. I I can agree with
Yeah.
that moral standing. I just do not think it is a realistic one to apply to everyone at all times. So in
I think it's
that
also
case,
fair to say that Nate did later state that they aren't really friends with Pumpkin Claws anymore, that they don't consider
Yes.
themselves buddies with them anymore.
Yes.
So not
Pumpkin
to
Cause has moved on.
yeah, so not to make you think that they're still interacting, they're not. They've drifted apart. They're not friends anymore.
So, I mean, in this particular case, it's a lot more sensitive. I think it depends on where you stand.
It
I
depends on
I
where you're willing
totally
to
understand.
yeah, it depends on where you're willing to put the foot down, but in this
Yeah.
case it's not as point blank as just Nate defended child porn.
Yeah, it's just not that clear. There was obviously some grayness there,
Yes,
is what we're saying.
it was a
So,
very gray situation. So yeah.
um, and more importantly, has Nate falsely accused people of crimes and behavior in the past year or so? That is also a gray area. That is a yes and no.
Yeah, it's a
Uh,
yes and no. To which extent I believe most people right now are coming out and saying they did is referring to a situation in which they didn't.
mhm,
There was a case where there was a minor who came forward to Nate and by extension the rest of the mod team expressing that there was a user in the fan base that had in fact, been sexually abusing them in, DMs and such.
mhm.
And basically Nate then made a call out for that user, but didn't want to include, of course, anything that the minor had like given them that could incriminate them or reveal who they were because we were keeping them private. But
Mhm.
someone else saw this and started sort of demanding the evidence, essentially also demanding the minor to reveal who they were. And when Nate refused, they got a little, harassing about it. They started really harassing both Nate and even ended up harassing the minor by extent. And the minor eventually felt forced to come out about it, which, is really terrible for them.
Terrible.
And so, and even then, people refused to believe that Nate was, is being genuine and think that, and they like to smear Nate and say that they were lying about it all, but they weren't. It was a true
Yeah,
situation, and they were definitely not lying about that user being a pedophile.
the user even has an admission, which I will go out of my way to link that in the description if I have to, but
Mm,
the person in question admitted to it.
yes,
So,
there was an
I mean,
admission.
all this back and forth, and Nate falsely accused me of pedophilia is completely out of line. Now,
Yes, and
there
said
are there
user
cases.
also, continued to change their age, hide the fact that to hide the fact of.
Yes.
But yeah, basically Nate didn't lie about that one.
Did
But
Nate lie about other ones?
I'd
Ye-
say yeah.
Yeah. I would
But
say
this
yeah.
is the most recent one, and that's the one that, of course, led to the whole DM fiasco,
Yeah.
where basically Nate accused someone of being a zoophile or bestiality, basically being into that.
Yeah.
And
Which you can be uncomfortable with feral porn. I am. I don't want to see it.
oh, same
But
here.
it it was not illegal or zoophilia. Like I like just from a legal standpoint, not a moral one. It's from a legal standpoint. Uh not the same thing. It was very extreme and it led to a lot of the community because Nate was pushing this idea. They were saying
Yes,
essentially this user is a zoophile and I feel like they are dangerous around children.
yes, Nate was essentially really being way too pushy about their. Basically, this was a very gray situation, but Nate didn't treat it as such. Nate treated it as black and white, and that's
Yes.
wasn't the proper response here.
Um, it led to the community then putting their foot down because the user in question apologized. So
Yes,
the user who drew the content apologized. They acknowledged that it was wrong. They apologized because they don't think minors should have ever had their hands on those things. They stepped down from anything that might have children because they realized children might be uncomfortable with them, and it was supposed to end there.
yeah,
But people could tell Nate still kind of wanted to start a fight.
Yes, it was
So,
as if Nate basically had a grudge against them because on said post when the artist in question mentioned that they were stepping down as a volunteer moderator for a very large art event, Nate basically responded with a pretty hostile I'm glad you stepped down,
yes,
basically disregarding the entire apology. And at that point, I also still, still hadn't announced that I was leaving, so I did manage to see a bit of how they were responding or reacting to that. To which I can say they were certainly not more professional, private. They basically also in there said that the artist in question was lying, that they were being deceptive, that they were treating it as if it wasn't as severe as it was, basically a whole lot of aggression. And,
yes.
you know, even that was severely uncomfortable for me, at least.
Because, I mean, you can choose not to forgive a person for something you feel is morally irresistible,
Hmm.
but to go as far as to say, I think, like, Nate thought this person was a criminal.
Yeah.
So they treated them like a criminal, and they
Hmm.
treated people were who felt the opposite like someone who supports a criminal.
Yeah.
Uh
There was way too much hostility, accusations, and such.
I mean, at the end of the day, what ended up happening was this content was never exposed to children before it was passed around in private. So when Nate got a hold of that material and shared it with this child,
Hmm.
they were the ones at fault,
Yeah.
not the person who drew the stuff.
No.
And that is just point blank the situation.
Yeah.
Other than that, Nate has been in plenty of situations that I am not aware of, and I can only pinpoint some of the ones they are right in and some of the ones they were wrong in. I cannot give you the full scope. I would say to be safe, don't just trust anyone who says they were falsely accused of anything by Nate, because some people were genuinely dangerous, some people weren't. Let that show, like, decide how you go about that
Yeah,
depending on how the
basically form your
community
own
reacts to.
opinion by looking into it.
Yeah, look into it, see how they behave. Um, each person did something different. Don't trust blindly, just be safe. There's more than enough ways to quietly observe and make sure that you're not dealing with someone potentially dangerous.
Yeah, because especially when you look about those people currently falsely saying that Nate falsely accused someone of being a pedophile, you can see that even the larger community actually spoke out against the pedophile, and
Yes.
like we're like, dude, this is not a false accusation. This is real.
This is real. There are multiple admissions.
Yes.
Uh, they are considering making their own video, which is why we are doing this.
Yes, that's why we felt we had to do this, especially with someone who, was directly involved,
Yes.
even until not so long ago. So I have to clarify, I didn't leave because of, I didn't cut ties or anything because of drama. I did so for mental health reasons because there was a tendency to be so much drama that it always came in and it was just so much, I just couldn't handle it anymore, and so I had to disconnect.
Yeah, and that's the hard part. A lot of unfortunately, I feel a lot of the issues that came about was because Nate felt they were the ones who were strong enough and needed to interject themselves into every possible situation,
Yes, they
which would
have.
be okay. Yes. It would be okay because I get it. I feel the same way sometimes. I feel like if I see trouble, I have to step in. That's why I'm speaking right now.
Mhm.
But you have to think about what you're doing before you do it. You cannot impulsively do anything. And what I'm hoping this situation brings about is that realization
Yeah.
that before you do anything, you really need to think about if it's the best thing to do and what's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
Because even if you think it's bad, you need to have all your ducks in a row. You need to be able to hold that down.
Another example of like Nate's tending to sort of treat these things as if they're as if they're responsible for them was another case. Again, I'm not going into names or specifics, but basically there was a tiny bit of drama on Twitter regarding a tricky commissions case where basically someone had undercharged their price when they were a little younger, and now they regretted it, but they were, several years into it. It was a large commission, and they basically didn't know what to do. At the time, I was actually the only adult technically involved, but then someone tweeted out about it without having fully known the situation. I went into that mod chat of the animation server to sort of, vent frustrations that I was a little frustrated. And I don't know if I accidentally communicated that I actually wanted help, because Nate sort of just jumped into the situation and contacted the person who had vague tweet in the first place. And, at the time, guess I kind of appreciated at the time being a person who isn't that, happy about confronting people. But in hindsight, it was kind of weird that Nate sort of took it as one of their battles when it wasn't. I was technically the only other adult who was really personally involved with this case, because I had been sought out by the artist in question for advice.
Mm-hmm.
So that was basically another example of Nate who, sort of jumped the gun and,
reacted without thinking.
And took over a situation is more what I meant.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was a little weird, I think. But in hindsight, it's kind of
it was
to what happened now.
I mean, overall, all these situations we're talking about are an accumulation of, again, a year of behavior that everyone has been concerned about.
Yes, this is not a short period of time. This is a very long period of time.
I would say Nate has been one of the most controversial users in the community in the past decade. And that is because a lot of people really appreciate them, but a lot of people are also very, very hurt by them. That is a hard position to be in.
Yeah, and it's also the confusing situation with people, being shown all these mixing situations of people calling Nate out. Again, sort of the damage of false callouts, making it seem non-legit when people were actually making good points about Nate.
Yes.
There were so many people who were just like, oh, Nate's dumb because they make cats trans and they make them gay, and I don't like that. And that's like,
yeah,
when you get those muddled together with the actual legitimate points, that's where people sort of become unable to tell, should I take you seriously?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we're also kind of doing this, to sort of warn not to make videos, pointless videos, if you really have only the basic bare bones knowledge of what the hell happened.
Yeah. I don't care how much research you do, you're not gonna have as much information as someone who is either personally there or personally a victim.
Yeah.
That's just not how it works.
Yeah,
so
please respect the victims and, people who were involved with this, and not make videos when you weren't involved.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it feels bad to be left out of the party, but this isn't a party you wanted to attend, buddy.
Yeah, this is kind of serious.
This is hell.
It's serious.
Yeah. Okay, so on to just general questions, such as, is the animation map hub, server they made, is that safe to stay in? Yes.
Yes.
I'd argue that maybe the admins need to be a little more aware of how aggressive they are being at times when tackling children, such as sometimes, luckily that wasn't the case so much when I left, but sort of at times it seemed that, like, when a kid came in and it was like, oh, I like Ivy Fern, they're so cute together, then another user would be rather hostile about it, would be like, oh, you like Ivy Fern? That's so gross. And another would be like, yeah, it's incest. And then an argument would start, because of course the kid would be stressed out. They would be like, why are people attacking me? This is a relationship that's in the book.
Yeah.
Why are people attacking me? And then it wouldn't help when the admins would sort of come in and just take the side of the people who were being aggressive, because that, of course, led the kids to being defensive.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that they need to have more patience when it comes to kids, and also the admin team is kind of full of minors as is.
Yeah.
Maybe cut down on that, or at least separate the minors and the adults in the mod team so that the minors only have to do technical stuff, while when it comes to more conceptual stuff, such as, people talking about topics that shouldn't be allowed or something, it should be the adults, because then hopefully there's a more mature response.
Yes, I agree. Overall, like, because I went into the chat for a bit, I could tell there was a little bit of a struggle to contain bullying,
Mm.
just from me sitting in there for a bit.
Mm.
So contain these children's urge to bully, and be the adult in the room. And if you're a minor who's a mod in that chat,
It's gonna be
please,
difficult.
it's really hard. Sometimes these are people your age.
Yeah.
Not everyone grows up the same. Gotta be a little more sensitive. You're in control.
Yeah, I never necessarily felt in a position where I was happy, like, voicing my concerns, more so because, again, I'm very scared of seeking conflict. I really hate doing that, so I was never really the person to voice how I felt, but I certainly didn't feel so great about having, like, 15-year-olds or 14-year-olds as mods. I didn't feel
Mhm.
too comfortable about that. I thought they were a little too young to do that. I thought maybe 15-year-olds was, like, okay, but 14-year-olds was a little too young for me,
Absolutely.
because they're only like 1 year older than the age limit for having a Discord in the first place. So that's like a little
Ooh,
too
yeah.
young.
Yeah, that's really bad.
So
I wouldn't have children that young as a mod in the first place, 16 and
no.
up, but I mean, not my server.
Yeah, I feel definitely that there is an argument to be made that maybe the mod should be only adults, but again, if
Yeah.
you separate them into different tasks, that the adults take the more difficult tasks, such as explaining banned materials and such, and explaining why they can't do that, handling these cases, leaving the minors to do the more technical things, such as, oh, someone maybe reposted art without credit, or someone saying a swear word, and the filter didn't get that, so let's just delete that. Let's just or move people to the right channel and such, like very
Mhm.
basic minimal helping tasks.
That you would need help with. Like,
Yeah,
that you can't do everything. Like, you would need that. So, let them do things like that.
yeah. That's basic. That's a Flight Rising server I was on for a while as well. uh we basically also did it like that, where it's the mods took care of the more difficult tasks, and we had helpers who were basically the more technical things, like people needed a role for something, they got the role. If they wanted something, they got something. Basically just the very basic technical stuff that isn't too difficult or emotionally draining.
Mhm. So, if you're a kid in in this particular server right now, you're safe. I think y'all saw that Nate passed down the power.
Yes, Nate
Um,
has given the power to their co-admin, who is not necessarily as controversial as them. They're definitely, I wouldn't say they're not the ones to actively seek out conflict in the same way Nate was, but they do tend to be very vocal about how they feel.
yes.
But in the sense, I feel you shouldn't expect something like Draikinator to do that with the server, with them in charge. So I think it's definitely safe to be there.
And I think overall, what, like, if you're wondering, like, because this is about to be the end,
Mm.
what do you think you should be doing? What should you do in accordance to the situation? Because it's getting really loud. Um,
I think you should let it be handled by the people, mentioned by the minors, like the authorities, their parents.
mhm.
Leave it to them, because this is their situation ultimately. And everyone else who was emotionally involved, regarding whether they were, involved with Nate or if they were affected by Nate, you should also leave them alone, because they are
Yes.
definitely going to need some time to recover after this, because this is heavy stuff.
Yes, absolutely. And if you're hearing things from other people, like people who are saying they're going to make their own video, or people who are talking about their situations with Nate, you can listen to them if you want to, but don't take anything to heart. Like, please don't listen to anyone other than
Keeping
those who've been
critical
directly involved.
Yeah, keep a
Yeah.
critical view on it. Basically, be critical of the points they make, and Remember to look at how they present stuff. If they're very emotionally charged, especially, that could be a very huge indicator that they're not being too genuine and they may be speaking out of malice.
Mm-hmm. Um, don't react out of malice. If you were a child who was bullied or treated hostilely by Nate, do not um, do not ride the train of people who are spewing all sorts of mean things, like doubting whether or not they've left, doubting whether or not they're in the hospital right now. I'm seeing so much nasty things. Like,
Yes,
do
because
better.
people who are saying that are essentially in the way exploiting children by exploiting vulnerable children who are like affected by this, children who just sort of want to be involved and want to know what's going on, so that these people are sort of exploiting them and being like, oh yeah, this is what happened, this is totally what happened. And
Hmm.
that's despicable. Like, just, yeah, stay safe with what you're hearing.
I mean, because like in the end, Nate made a lot of enemies. Some who are innocent and some who are actually dangerous. So you have to be mindful of that. They've also made a lot of friends who are
Currently
they are
trying
they're
to
in
understand.
yeah, they're kind of in shock. Even if you think that's ridiculous, you kind of have to respect that because there's there's the potential that Nate has helped them at some point.
Yes, Nate was
And
definitely close to a lot of the people I've noticed who are like in shock right now. That there
yes,
was very much closeness there. So please understand
um,
that this is difficult for them.
just overall, um, we don't know what's warranted and what isn't. The backlash is warranted, but not to this level. Don't
No,
listen to
not,
people who are spreading misinformation.
yeah, and
Don't listen to
essentially,
people sending death threats.
and also the whole making it into a big party as if this is something fun, as if this is something you should get in on. It's not fun, it's not something you should get in on. And especially minors shouldn't be really getting more involved with this case, considering its very inappropriate,
Hmm.
details.
Um,
Like, you
at
deserve
the
to
end
be
of the
made aware, of course, but like,
oh yeah.
seeking details is what I mean.
um, and I think that's all we can really say. Like, like Nate made one of the fastest, most incredible and quick uprisings I have ever seen in this fandom, and I was thoroughly impressed.
Yeah.
But with that came a lot of damaging behavior, a lot of damaging traits that hurt and led them into this current situation.
Mm.
Um, they've helped a lot of people and they've hurt a lot of people. Me personally, I hope they can get help and learn from this. I don't want them around children anymore because I mean, it hurts me to see that. It hurts me to have kids come to me because I don't interact that much, but
Oh.
it hurts me to have kids come to me or friends of Nate come to me and not know what to do. I never liked seeing that, so I think I hope Nate can really grow from this. I hope Nate can get some help. I hope the victim is also okay. I hope the child who went through this is, because I can imagine they're getting a lot of traffic and they're watching all this go down. I hope their parents are closely involved. I hope the police are having an easy time dealing with this whole situation. It's very sensitive,
Yeah.
and I really want to see this kind of calm down and let it run its course.
Yeah, definitely.
Um,
Oh.
efficient justice and recourse will be dealt. Y'all don't need to be the ones to do it. We've already taken it as far as we can. We need to let the people who are going to take serious and immediate action do their jobs.
Yeah, don't
So
bring a
we
match
can't
to
do
a
this.
forest fire.
Yeah,
That's all I had to say, definitely.
yeah, that's all I have to say too.
For
Um,
listening.
thanks for listening, and I hope you guys have a nice evening or day.
Or just time.
Please be safe.
And
And thank you.
bye.
Bye.